The Holy Gospel according to Mark. Glory to you, O Lord. Then they came to Jerusalem, and he entered the temple and began to drive out those who were selling and those who were buying in the temple. And he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold doves. And he would not allow anyone to carry anything through the temple. He was teaching and saying, "Is it not written, 'My house shall be called a house of prayer for all the nations'? But you have made it a den of robbers." And when the chief priests and the scribes heard it, they kept looking for a way to kill him, for they were afraid of him,
Mama,
because the whole crowd was spellbound by his teaching.
Mama, why did everyone?
And when evening came, Jesus and his disciples went out of the city.
To kill,
The gospel of the Lord.
to kill him.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Why did he want to?
By the rivers of Babylon, where we sat down, and there we were, when we remember Zion. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. In the magnificent cathedral, the most honorable, right reverend, privy general, superior preacher to the royal court, the chosen favorite of the select circles, appears before a refined circle and preaches greatly moved by the text he himself selected. God has chosen the poor and despised of this world. And nobody laughs. This is Søren Kierkegaard assaulting Bofu Kirke in Copenhagen centuries ago. However, this layperson verbal assault on his Danish temple, or the violent weaponized assault upon Washington Capitol on January 6, 2021, are but pale shadows compared with Jesus' assault upon the temple of Jerusalem 2,000 years ago. Needless to say, the agendas of Jesus, Kierkegaard, and the white supremacists of USA assault were very different. By assaulting their national temples, Jesus and Kierkegaard became dead persons walking, whereas the White House agitator is still alive and very well fed. On this third week in Lent, we see Jesus picketing inside the Jerusalem temple. It came as no surprise, given what he learned from his mama singing, "God has taken rulers down from their thrones. God has sent the rich people away with nothing." Rulers and high priests have been dancing cheek to cheek for quite a while. We can think of Solomon's temple, Herod's temple, St. Peter's Basilica, and Bofu Kirke. Why don't we buckle up our seatbelts and take a tour? Solomon's temple. Today's psalm and the Hebrew scriptures pericope tell us so. The book of Ezra we just read rightly focuses on a topic current empires don't want to listen to. In this case, the restoration of the wealth the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar plundered from the Temple of Solomon, built in the 9th century and destroyed in the 6th century before Common Era. Nonetheless, we can't be oblivious to the fact that Ezra, with the Babylonian king Darius as a sponsor, not only was the precursor of the extravagant Herod's temple, also known as the Second Temple, but he also rebuilt Jerusalem's wall. Whereas Solomon didn't have a problem at all with foreign women, Ezra became a wall builder, a deportee in chief, and a breaker of families in the name of God. Does it ring the bell? Psalm 84 is our Bible song for this morning, probably written by the rivers of Babylon. It also is a longing for the marvelous temple of Solomon and the good old days. For one day in your courts is better than 1,000 elsewhere. Nevertheless, the obliged questions are, according to whose narrative? Were all welcome in that temple? Who could afford to keep their membership? Who belonged to the walled city and the segregated temple? Our next stop is Herod's temple. The Gospel of Mark tells us so. In the year 46 before Common Era, Herod the Great began expanding and renovating the temple, not out of piety, but in order to get legitimation, since he himself was half Idumean. The construction lasted 46 years, namely, it was going on throughout the entire life of Jesus. It was the main industry of the city with 18,000 employees in their payroll and 15,000 priests in the roster. The majority of Jerusalem inhabitants live of the temple. This was a multi-purpose building complex. Since the temple functioned as an IRS office, no matter how many times revolutionaries will burn the debt archives, there was always a backup in the clouds. Its annual tax revenue was 15 million laborer minimum wages. Taxes represented between 25 to 40% of the people's income. The temple functioned as a bank, which Jesus already denounced during his third temptation in the desert. That is, the owners of the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. Priests charge interest on loans from 60 to 200%. The temple also functioned as a slaughterhouse. To become a priest, nobody will get their candidacy committee endorsement if they were not good butchers. 2,000 priests officiated simultaneously. The temple had its own police and functioned as the backyard of a military fortress. The Antonia fortress was in charge of protecting the temple and keeping custody of the high priest's clothes. For instance, there was a private way to lead Pontius Pilate to the temple. This was considered a matter of national security. The temple functioned as a courthouse with legislative attributions. For sure, they were millionaires. Enough is enough, said Jesus by assaulting the temple and turning over the money changers and animal sellers' tables. The Galilean reclaimed the temple as a place of solidarity with the impoverished people, as an occasion to build relationships of sorority and fraternity. In fact, the Gospel of Mark is the only one that puts in Jesus' lips the words of Isaiah. The temple must be a house of prayer for all nations. Now, we're ready to visit St. Peter's Basilica. Justinian, the emperor of the Byzantine Roman Empire, built and he himself inaugurated the Hagia Sophia Cathedral in 537 Common Era. When Justinian was inside the world's largest building for 1,000 years, he humbly yelled, "Solomon, I have surpassed you." Rome didn't want to be left behind this rush to build the tallest ziggurat or Babel Tower. Pope Julius II in 1506 began the construction of St. Peter's Basilica, that was completed in 1615 and became the largest temple up until today. Basilica is a borrowed name from Basileus, or king, that is, royal hall, which proliferated all over the empire since the days of Constantine for social control. It comes as no surprise that the origin of the Reformation had to do precisely with the building of a basilica at the very dawn of the 16th century. The launching of the campaign to raise money through the selling of indulgences was the straw that broke the camel's back. In assaulting the biggest Christian temple, Martin Luther became an outlaw and heretic by turning over the money changers' tables. Before our final destination, here we are at Bofu Kirche. 3 centuries after Luther's assault upon Christendom, Kierkegaard did the same at the Church of Our Lady Cathedral in Denmark with his revolutionary humor. The definition of the church found in the Augsburg Confession, the saints where the word is rightly taught and the sacraments rightly administered, this quite correctly grasps only the 2 points about doctrine and sacraments and has overlooked the first, the communion of the saints. Thus, the church is made into a communion of indifferent existences. But the doctrine is correct, and the sacraments are rightly administered. This is pure paganism. It is not by accident that Kierkegaard inspired Bonhoeffer's great topics of the cost of discipleship and the cheap grace, while also turning over the Nazis' money changers' tables. In his radical years, Kierkegaard began using the public media to spread the liberating gospel of Jesus Christ. This Lutheran layperson once recorded these words: Luther's homily encourages us to preach the gospel in the open air, to go beyond the church walls. What a pity that Luther preached those words inside a church. And now this is the end of our tour. The current worldless church. The insatiable capitalist system denies death for us to keep on consuming to death. No wonder it had to be a virus baptized as COVID-19, the one that is forcing us to hear the cry of our Mother Earth's fatigue and chronic disease. The worshippers of Mammon, the idol of woman, of money, for centuries have insisted on us keeping a social distance from what is not monetarily profitable, meaning you are not your neighbor's keeper, you are not our mother's landskeeper, you are not. However, as Christians during the present pandemic, we keep a healthy physical distance from people, but never, ever a social distance. In the midst of this asymmetric pandemic, Jesus' words, yet the time is coming and is now here, when true worshipers will worship God in spirit and truth, sound very different to the ears of the impoverished communities than to the well-connected, gated neighborhoods and countries that have built countless physical, psychological, and economic walls. Martin Luther practiced civil disobedience when in 1527, the civil authority asked him to fly from Wittenberg due to the pandemic. Luther, like Savonarola in Florence a century before, risked his life for the sake of the suffering people, the true temples of the Holy Spirit. During these days, a prophet denounced some Spaniard bishops who used their power to get vaccinated, denying with that action their apostolic succession. Since Jesus clearly told his apostles, the first will be the last. While the modern money changers keep instilling fear and militarizing our societies, we as Christians keep instilling a hopeful resistance by recreating our concept of what it means to be church. We keep reinventing our communitarian self through our social nearness. We're called to conform, not to conform to this world, but to confront the powers that be. Before the pandemic, first call, pastors were advised, don't take a church with a flat roof because it's going to jeopardize your bread and butter. Now we realize that another way of being church is possible. In spite of the militaristic language of war against the virus, lockdowns, and curfews, in spite of the idea that from now on, the cyber platforms want to be the only means of communication, in spite of the fact that the modern heralds warn us that the masks are here to stay forever, let's keep in mind and feel it in our hearts that another way of being church is possible. Dorothy Sule cautioned us against Christolatry, namely to admire Christ instead of following him. Jesus Christ prefers disciples than disciplinarians. By Jesus, Jeremiah, Isaiah, Luther, and Kierkegaard, and us assaulting the temple, we're invited to go beyond Christendom, beyond churchianity, beyond templolatry. It is not for nothing that Revelation 21 warns us that in heaven there aren't any church buildings. The absolute criteria of salvation, according to Matthew 25, is to feed the hungry, to provide water to the thirsty, to clothe the naked, to visit the people in jail, to look after the sick, to welcome the foreigners. Boltman grasps the spirit of this pericope while preaching that we are judged by our unconscious behavior because it is in this that we rebel ourselves. We have to be conscious that the judgment depends on unconscious behavior and recognizes that the essence of our being is love, giving us our real value. So why don't we join the voices of Jesus' mamas in singing the Magnificat with Johann Sebastian Bach's background music? God puts the humble people in places of power. God gives the hungry good things to eat and sends the rich away with empty hands.